Okay, good evening, everyone. And welcome to the second installation of our project Pigi's Game Dev Talk to Prototyping a Game. So, I hope you're excited to learn from our amazing line of speakers. But before we start the panel discussion, I'm sure all of you are super excited. We would like to first introduce our special guest. Tonight, Mr. Paul Gadi. So he's the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of OP Games and also one of the pioneering game developers in the Philippines. So he's here to share some details first about what they're building in OP Games. Without further ado, let's all give Paul Gadi a virtual round of applause. Okay, so
Cool. All right. So I guess I can start with telling a little bit about what us at OP Games are doing. I guess in a nutshell, OP Games is a Web3 game development company, and we're looking at helping game developers to bridge onto Web3. So I think Web3 needs a bit of explaining since it's a pretty new subject. But I guess one thing we could use to as an analogy to think of it is we're sort of like a publisher to help game developers find success in this new world of Web3. But the challenges here now is that I would say that we're a bit different. It's not like an app store. We're not doing the app store way, and we're using technologies such as DAOs, decentralized storage, and all the other tools that Web3 can provide. So I guess I can start by doing a little bit of intro as well. So these are some of our partner developers, and what we really want to do is we want to use the new technologies that we have on WebT to really reclaim power back to independent game creators. I will say a little bit about that, but these are some of the games that we've worked with. Conquest ETH, which is a fully on-chain strategy RTS game made by Ronan Sanford, who was the lead developer of Sandbox. And this other game is Flip Flop, which is the winner of the Gamedev.js competition last year. And the last one is Forest Cuties by Andrej, who is the organizer of JS13K, which is one of the biggest web game communities out there, wherein people make games in just 13 kilobytes of JavaScript. So these developers we feel um, aren't really primed to find success currently in the current state of the game industry, since these games are made on the web. These games don't have the same marketing pull as most games, I would say. And we kind of want to help these game developers, starting with the HTML5 game developers, and really help them reclaim power back. Because if we look at the game industry now, I guess it's in a very different state from when I started. So Marix mentioned that I was one of the old game developers. So I started game development around when mobile games were starting up, and during that time also, well, a few years back then, the internet kind of became a thing while we were making games. So all of us were playing Diablo on LAN, and then finally online. And this was sort of like the early metaverse for us, as you would hear now, and like in the buzzwords around the internet. But as the years went by, it kind of changed from, I guess, from what we wanted to see as gamers. That there's something called the attention economy, which right now, which are most companies right now are attuned towards. And it kind of has affected how games are made. Now everything has to be about attention. You have to make your player play as long as you can, and what kind of business models come up from that? Now we have loot boxes, we have hyper casual games that put out a lot of ads, and I feel these aren't the games that we want to make. We need to be able to showcase the games that say something about the human condition. For example, like Javi's work or Coffee Talk. But having said that, though, the game industry moves in cycles. So we're in a very mature cycle now, and we have the technologies to kind of disrupt what the state of the market is. I remember in social games before, when Facebook games were coming up, I had a startup also doing Facebook games, which failed. But during that time, that social games, when PopCap, the developer of Plants vs Zombies, were looking at it, they said social games are a bit evil. That we found it quite disturbing, but we had to kind of get over that as we were making it. So it's really these technologies that disrupt the cycles. And now we have social games and mobile games before, and now Web3, I feel, is the technology that will allow us to move past this current cycle. And again, we're in a mature cycle. Everything kind of centralizes around Web2 platforms, the app stores, the social networks. As a game developer, you can kind of see that every part of the creation process, there's some rent extracted by the Web2 platforms, from creation to the game engines, distribution, discoverability, and monetization. All of that, something is extracted from the game developer. And we really feel that Web3 is how we kind of will be able to bring about meaningful change here. We are at a point in history where we can define value however we want and optimize it towards the values that we believe are more important. So I think how we need to do this is we need to start building an open source. We need to not rely on closed platforms. So when I say closed platforms, examples are social networks like Facebook or Gmail. But when we say open protocols, we need to use the protocols themselves, like Gmail is built on top of email. Facebook, I hear, is built on something called ActivityPub, and the app stores, which is now, I guess, the main centralized platform. That's something that we need to find to make an open protocol of, and that's what we want to do in OP Games. We want to make an open protocol to decentralize video games so that we don't have to rely on the same old business models. Um, and yeah, and this is how it was done, I would say, in the space of DeFi or decentralized finance. They created these small code called money Legos. So we have the ERC20 standard, which kind of started to create all of these other code on top of it. And this is something that I think we need to do as game developers. We need to use open source code. We need to build tools on top of each other so that we are able to create these app stores that aren't like the app stores that we see now, but something that's decentralized, anyone can use, and that no one defines the economics for us. Yeah, so again, Web2 locks in game developers on each part of this process, from the game engines that we use to the app store, to ad networks, to in-app purchases. And if we use Web3, there are ways for us to be able to get out of that. I would say that these are the things that are starting to emerge now. I know a lot of people hear about NFTs. There's a lot of outrage out there, but there are people really finding success. Artists are finding success in NFT, music creators, and other artists. And I think here, this creator economy is something we should take a look at. Um, Tourney revenues as well is something we're taking a look at. This is something we're building in OP Games. Is an arcade where people can play tournaments and earn currency as they do so. And the last part is DAOs and DeFi. So when I say DAOs, that's decentralized autonomous organizations, and DeFi is decentralized finance. So we have all these tools using Web3, and we should try to use them so we are able to make the games that we want to make. There are some original Web3 games as inspiration. I won't discuss each of them anymore, but do take a look at what these are. This one is Eternal, another Web3 game, and DAO is a game built around decentralized autonomous organizations. And Dark Forest is a game that uses zero case snarks. It's a new technology to allow us to use fog of war better, I would say. And yeah, and then I'll just run through these slides very fast. But the first step, really, I think, if you want to succeed in Web3, is to build community. And one of the most successful projects I've seen there is Board Ape Yacht Club. So do a Google here on Board Ape Yacht Club. And what they did was they created these avatars, 10,000 avatars that people can buy. So it's like sort of like a Kickstarter. And they did very well because it had great art. It looked like the gorillas art that was unseen before in Web3, that this quality of art, which goes to show that a lot of game developers will find success if they're able to make good art here. And they understood the culture of Web3 and NFTs. And as of a month ago, they were able to raise 154,000 Ethereum, which is quite a lot given that it's a small project. So I think game developers should take a look at this. Let's see what we can do around this technology. Uh, Remember Kickstarter when people were just starting up making games around that? I think this is the model. This is what we should be trying to do in this new space. So we have the tools in OP Games to create these. It's all open source. I can share it with the team later. So you can just create avatars, and then you can create NFTs out of them and try to build a community, build a story out of the games that you're doing. So some more useful tools on how to get started. Avatars can definitely bootstrap community growth. And another Another project that I would encourage people to take a look at is the Loot project, wherein uh, the game developers started making these NFTs that are just loot. So if you look at this, these are like chainmail, holy glyphs of giants, silk gloves. So it's just items on chain, but people saw this as an example of game Legos that I mentioned. That people started building games on top of these NFTs, and now each of these NFTs are very valuable. The current volume as of last month was 60,450 Ethereum. That's times $3,000, I would say. And this was a project that was only started, I would say, just in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, I was able to raise that huge amount of currency, and I think now people are able to build new things using that. So yeah, so I think I only have 1 minute. So if people want to collaborate with OP Games, we have the OP Arcade, which is sort of like Congregate, sort of like Congregate, the Flash portals that were there before Newgrounds. So if you have a game, an HTML5 game, or even a Unity game that you want to promote there, we can put it up there. And then we can teach you also how to go into Web3. So we have our own NFT project as well called the Arcadians. We can collaborate around that. We can help you create the game NFTs or explore how to make loot derivatives or build games on top of loot. And yeah, and so I guess I want to end with saying that a lot of things will change because of Web3. I feel that the foundations of game design are changing because of this, and a lot of game developers, I know, and rightly so, are a bit apprehensive around NFTs, blockchain, and Web3 because there's a lot of scammers out there also. So but I would engage people to take a look at the technology, take a look at all the good people that are trying to build things on top of Web3. Take a look at Gitcoin, which is one of the open source projects. Take a look at Uniswap. Take a look at all the games that I shared earlier before, and you'll see that there's a lot of game developers who are trying to use this new technology to really break the cycle of app stores. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to talking more with you guys, and just reach out to OP Games to us if there's anything that you want to ask around Web3. That's it. Thank you, Marix.
OP Games. So hopefully more game developers can check out your projects and platforms. So guys, if you have questions, please be reminded that you may post it in the comment section of this live video, and we will try our best to answer it later. Okay, so now to start the panel, I'm sure again everyone is super excited. So let me first introduce our official moderator and speaker. So for our moderator, Mr. Derek Mapago, the founder and creative director of Most Played Games. Our line our line of panel speakers, Fami Hasni of an indie game developer of Coffee Talk and What Comes After, Roan Contreras, indie game developer of Waiting System and Point Line, Javi Almirante, indie game developer of Duloga, and Robert Cruz, game director and lead game designer of Ranida Games. And last but not the least, again, Mr. Paul Gadi, CTO of OP Games. So, without any further delay, let's all give our speakers another virtual round of applause.
All right. Yay. Right. Thank you, Paul, for that intro. It's really exciting
Welcome.
to see that we have like new technologies coming in the game development space, and it's nice that a Filipino co-founder is part of that. And now we're going to talk about prototyping, which is usually a buzzword that we hear in the game dev circles. And actually, each like studio or game developer has their own way of going about it, and it will be nice that we can talk about it with different developers, studios in today's talk. And yeah, for our first question, why is it important for game developers to make a prototype of your game? Maybe let's start with Rowan first.
Of all the person. But anyway, um, so firstly, hello guys. My name is Roan. But then anyway, for me, it's important to have a prototype. That's because if we're pitching a game, there's a paper, and sometimes the paper doesn't seem to convince the people. So probably the prototype would help them convince your game idea because ideas coming from your prototype. So it's more on the motion, the partial graphics, and you're starting to get to the first part of your, well, your game, your overall game that you want to sell. So yeah, it's mostly in the convincing side of things for me.
All right. So moving it's like a pitching thing for you for Ron.
Yeah.
How about Javi? What do you think about prototyping a game?
Okay, so what Rohan said is good. It's about convincing, but for me, prototyping has a lot to do with learning, because you won't necessarily always make a prototype for business or for example, pitching to a company. Sometimes you want to be able to test out a mechanic. Sometimes you want to be able to, just try out something new, or maybe you just don't know if something is fun yet. So the thing with making a prototype is the implication is you're not committing fully to a thing when you don't know if it works. So you need to make a prototype first, because you can't know, oh, I'm going to make a big JRPG. No. First, you need to know, is the combat system I'm going to make going to be fun? Is it going to be interesting enough for me to even continue developing this game? So prototyping is mostly about learning, not just about learning how you're going to make a mechanic, but also learning, is this even worth my time? And that's why I think it's important to prototype a game.
Right. So it's more of the design part of things, finding maybe the fun, finding maybe the core idea of the game. So that's really cool, Javi. Now let's go to Robert. What do you think about making a prototype for your game?
Hello, Ed. So yeah, I think making a prototype for your game is very important because, as mentioned already, you don't want to commit to a project yet without having a prototype because that would be going in blind. So as mentioned, it's important to have a prototype if you want to gauge the fun in the game. That's your kind of your primary goal in making a prototype. You want to see if the game that you will be making is fun, because sometimes things sound better in your head, but in practice they tend to fall flat. So you have to find that out early before committing 2 3 months worth of manpower and then finding that out. And then another thing that we try to figure out in our prototype, at least in our studio, is we want to see if the idea that we're planning to do is feasible and is it scalable. For example, we sometimes have ideas that sound fun. When we try it, it's fun. But then from the prototype, we figure out that we can't sustain this kind of development for 2 3 5 months down the line. We'd have to take in a lot more manpower, or we can't meet the deadline, especially if it's client work. We can't meet the deadline of just 3 months. So we have to scale down the idea. So based on the prototype that we made, we can have a reduction, so to speak. We can deduce if it's feasible, if it's scalable, if it's even possible, and then from there we just change the idea as we go.
Right. So it's cool that you mentioned about the production side of things. So it's cool that like if each of you guys have a different answer to the question. But how about Fami? Why is it important for you to make a prototype of your game?
They've answered all the good answers, so I'm not really sure what should I answer. But basically, what everybody else have been saying is true. Prototype is important if you want to pitch, if you want to find publishers, investors, if you want to convince them to give you money, if you want to convince yourself that this game worth working on, if you want to convince your team, because sometimes you only have the budget to invite a programmer, and then you need more convincing to get the artist. You make a fun prototype. If you don't have the budget to hire the programmer, you make a beautiful prototype with less gameplay, something like that. It's basically prototype is there to convince everyone that will be involved in the game. So yeah.
Right, that's cool. And yeah, with prototypes, you will be able to feel the game yourself, and that's a different experience compared to what's something in your head. Really cool answers, guys. So next one would be, I think this will also be a different, per studio, per developer kind of thing. So how do you go about your prototyping phase? Can you walk us through your processes? So let's toss coin. Who wants to go first? Raise your hand. I'm gonna point to Roan. Roan, you go first.
It's me again. So yeah, I'm going to try avoid speaking in Tagalog here. So Are we allowed to share screen? Just because if we want to walk to our process, then it might require our screen to be shown. I'm not sure about that.
Yes, you can.
Yes. Okay. I'll try to share screen with caution, just because we know the internet. Share screen. Easiest with monitors. Don't show these tips again. Okay. So you guys can see my screen properly. Wait. Nice. So this is the game that I made last Ludum Dare. For those of you who don't know what Ludum Dare is, it's a game jam, a very trendy game jam over Twitter and over the internet. So then, uh, let me take a look at the question again. Sorry about the right. So basically, I open a software in order to begin the prototyping. That's because if you don't have a software, then you cannot be able to do prototyping. That depends on your interpretation. That's because sometimes I tend to prototype on paper, just like paper games. I also tend to prototype in PowerPoint, because PowerPoint is like the point and click without the particles and some other things. I also tend to prototype in text. So I used a Visual Studio that creates a console app, so I tend to prototype it there. So mostly the process is uh, last day. I don't want to show the PowerPoint or the file. This is where I tend to look at my stuff. So mostly I tend to start with a experience. Last game I played, last event that happened, especially this pandemic, last game, or probably the last thing that I thought of. So mostly what happened to a game that I played. I also play online games, so I tend to see the toxicity there. So toxicity sometimes help in my ideas. That's why I tend to think about the uh, that's why I tend to think about the toxicity that also grabs a fragment in order to gain my ideas in prototyping. So yeah, it's mostly on an application. Once I open the application, it already allowed me to do things, hacking things, and also aside from what you're seeing in the screen, some of the files here are recycled. So I also recycle a couple of files from my past games. That's because if I'll be reinventing the wheel, then what you did from the first game would already contribute to your second game or third game, or whatever is the amount of the game you already made. So yeah, this is already the process. You already know what this is. Then I can already stop sharing my screen.
All right.
So yeah, that's the process.
So it's cool that you have already a template on prototyping. It will help you become faster in prototyping. That's really cool. And you're the first person to share your Unity project, and that's awesome. All right, let's go with Fami next, because Javi and Robert might answer questions that Fami will also tell us.
I'm sorry.
uh, I mean, like, I'm the kind of developer that I'm one of the I'm an unreliable developer because I cannot code, I cannot draw, I cannot make music. Basically, everything you need to make games, I cannot do that. But I have one skill that I'm pretty confident, and that thing is I'm good at bullshit. I'm good at selling ideas. Uh, I'm a writer. I used to be a marketer. So the way I do prototype is by uh, making a pitch deck, explaining how the game will play, how much I will need to make this prototype, because this is not something that is pretty common, I guess. But a lot of people, a lot of publishers actually have prototype funding. You can ask for money to make prototypes. For example, like Toge have this one program they call TGFI, Toge Game Fund Initiative, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, they will give you up to 10,000K, 10,000, not 10,000K, of course, up to 10K uh, to build your prototype. And that's a lot of money. So if you know how to pitch it, uh, that's the way to do it, I guess, because once you have the budget, I start hiring people to make the games, which is this is not something practical or doable for everyone, but if you don't know how to make games, at least you can ask for help, and just do what you do best. In my case, it's writing and bullshit.
All right, so that's cool. It's a bit different from Roan, because Roan, yeah, is a developer and a designer at the same time. For Fami, is more of a somebody who does pitches, and that's kind of a like what I've seen as well for like bigger developers. The pitching thing is or having a document is really helpful, especially for those who's higher up to figure out if the pitch is really cool. Next would be, let's say, Robert. How do you go about your prototyping phase?
Hello. And so in really the games, the prototyping phase is actually part of what we call pre-production phase. So in pre-production phase, we give ourselves time to do R&D, to do the prototype for both art and core game mechanics, to write the GDD as much as we can, and list down all of the tasks that will be needed. So the length of the pre-production time depends on the time allotted for the project, because of course it will eat into that development time. But we try to give ourselves a big chunk of time for that, because in prototyping we believe that the better you do your pre-production, the faster and more efficient you will be able to make the end product. And in terms of the process of prototyping, we follow Luna Javier's concept of ugly, quick, and dirty. I think so most of you already know that. But it was a talk that she did a few years ago. So the idea is it doesn't have to be good looking. Just have to make a very ugly, dirty looking prototype as fast as you can, and then from there you do feedback. So the entire team can deliberate on what's the status of the prototype. And then when it comes to how to actually make a prototype, sometimes you don't even have to make builds. Sometimes we do our prototyping inside the editor, because sometimes it's a lot of hassle to try to make a build, give that to everybody else, install it on your mobile phones, and then uh, have everyone play, then do feedback, and then do it all over again. So sometimes it's just faster for the main developer to push the build to our Git server, and then everybody pulls, and then everybody tests on editor, and then give feedback immediately. So that's that's how we do our prototyping. In short, that's how we actually do our pre-production, so to speak.
Right. Having that kind of feedback loop is really cool. I have seen some developers as well having maybe a focus group that will test all the builds that comes out. Especially if maybe fans of your games can be also a
Yes,
focus
yes,
group
definitely.
that you can pull in, and that's really cool. That will help out a lot in your prototyping, especially if you want to come up with that fun in your game. How about Javi? What do you think about prototyping and your process?
I suddenly feel what Fami felt earlier because he was the last. So everyone had really good answers. But if you're asking me how I go about prototyping, it starts with that thing. So behind me, there's like a whiteboard. I just write out all my concepts, which is really important because like last month's talk was about conceptualizing a game, right? I feel like um, when you're making your prototype, you sort of have to have a strong idea or at least a kind of a good idea of what core experience you want your game to be. And then when you go about making the prototype, you don't think about making everything work. Like sometimes you just, okay, how much can I fake that'll feel like the real game? Like even if like for example you're fighting an enemy and you want to be able to damage that enemy, maybe there's no damage system at all. Maybe you just make a health bar look smaller over time. It doesn't have to be a real functional thing. It just has to feel like the game you want to make. And then if you feel like it works, okay, I'm going to incrementally build on that prototype. I'm going to improve on it, I'm going to make some things work. And then if it's feeling like it's lacking, you change it again. So prototyping is like a continuous process where you keep changing things, but never lose sight of your core. That will make your prototype feel like a stronger whole as you go about it.
Right. I like that you're focusing on the core mechanic, because yeah, sometimes some of us, especially when we're into maybe in the middle of the development, we forget about the core mechanic, and that's kind of like one of the more important things that developers should remember in their games, to keep the core mechanic intact or in your head. That's really cool. So actually, we have again different answers. Having maybe a more production answer, having a more creative answer, having a more different answers, which is a really cool. And now we're gonna proceed to the next question, and I think this is one of the cooler parts of this panel discussion. What are the signs to look for if your prototype is good, or maybe when do you stop? I don't know if that's the easier way to go about it. um, I'm not gonna point Javi at the last now because that's like the least favorable position, so maybe let's start with Robert first.
So what are the signs that we're looking for? So yeah, I think this ties back to the first question of why we do the prototype. So we set out to do prototypes to find out if it's fun, if it's doable, if it's scalable. So those are the kind of things that we'll be looking for. So we say that the prototyping is done if we have ticked all of those boxes. So we won't stop prototyping until we find a fun game. That's first and foremost. I mean, as developers, that's our primary goal, right? To make the game fun. So sometimes the things that you plan to make aren't as fun, or sometimes even if you change it as much, it changes. Game ideas changes, but sometimes they just won't work together. So we won't stop doing the prototype until we are sure, 100% sure that we have something fun, especially if we have focus groups or we have a target market to test out the game and tell that the game is fun or at least fun enough. So we won't stop until then. And then also we like I mentioned, production wise, we we figure out if the prototype is good, if we can scale it. So if it's something that we can do long term, if it's something we can do 6 months in, if it's something that can be done by the team. I mean, for example, we kind of did a prototype before that sounds really good. It's really good, but and then we need 3 programmers and 1 multiplayer guy, and we don't have that. So we have to be realistic about it. If your studio, if your team is not capable of doing the project, even no matter how fun the prototype is, you have to scale it back because that's what the prototype is. It gives you a snapshot of what your intended goal, of your intended game. And then another thing that we look for is if we assess if we can actually do it, both in the technical front and in the motivational front. I mean, we have to admit developers are kind of moody at times. Some developers don't really do well under pressure, or sometimes they just don't like the genre. Sometimes they're just not into it. You have to admit that. So we have to assess all of those, and once we've ticked all of the boxes and the deadline for the pre-production is up, we review and then we we move forward. If it's okay, if everything is okay, we move to production. If
Right.
not, then we just do something else.
That's awesome. So finding the fun in the game, I like that. The core of the answer. Let's go to Paul. First time he's gonna answer. Welcome into the panel.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Derek. I wanted to chime in here because the question is how do we know if it's good, right? And I'm seeing, I guess it's not really a new trend, but some of the games, what they're doing is they have an early access, for example, and they have a Discord channel, and they allow the community to really join in very early on in the production process. So it's in games in on Steam, you see that a lot, but in Web3, like it's really very new, wherein even if the developer is just really making the game, like just making the story around it, he already creates a Discord and gets people to join in. And I guess that's what I mentioned DAOs earlier today. So it's a new kind of organization where you engage the community to actually help you build the game. So if you want to try exploring that, you're gonna do some new things, I would say. But it also allows you to see if a prototype is good because you're gonna share it already very early to your community. There's pros and cons there. Sometimes you might show it too early, and people will say, "Oh, this is trash. Don't continue this." But you're still finding the fun, right? You're still finding the game, like Javi said that, or like what Luna said that it has to be quick and dirty. So sometimes people don't understand that. But if you have a good focus group in your community to let you who understands that it's still a game being made, that who looks at the game design rather and the game mechanics rather than the aesthetics, then that's very good advice. So something to consider if you guys want to get a community early on, because I know I mentioned community as well in my presentation.
That's awesome, Paul. And actually, it's quite interesting that you're into crypto, blockchain, decentralization, and also when you're getting feedback from people, it's also like a
Yeah,
crowdsourcing thing. It's really
it's
related to what you're doing.
it is. It's very weird, honestly. It's if people get into crypto and NFTs and all of these new decentralized organizations, you talk to a lot of anonymous people. Some of them you're talking to, like when you go on camera, someone is talking to you and he's using like an anime filter. So it's really strange, like this crypto world. But I think all of us game developers should take a look at it because I don't want to hammer on the point, but I think everyone should look at this new technology.
Right. Cool. All right. Let's go to Fami next. How do you define if it's fun? If it's the right prototype?
So this is kind of cheating, but basically, if you don't have anyone to pay for that prototype, just don't make it. It's the best kind of validation because when I left Toge and start deciding that I wanted to be a full time indie, my plan was I'm gonna make prototypes, short games, 3 months maximum, and just pitch it everywhere. And if no one wants it, I'm going to make another prototype, 3 months maximum, pitch it everywhere until either I got someone who likes one of the prototype or until I run out of money and I have to work the normal job. And yeah, that's the it's a bit cheating, but that's the easiest way to do it because at least if the game fails, you still have something to help you live, I guess. And one other thing is a little bit of story actually. When I was working, I started working on my current game, Project Heartbreak, since I think January or February last year. And I have a partner, programmer. We work together, and then I use my personal life savings to hire artists to make the prototype. And we work on the prototype for like 2 months or 3 months, and I ran out of money, and nobody wants the game, which is like, oh shit, what am I supposed to do, right? And so we decided to find another partner, another company that want to help us making games. Uh, we use the same code base as the abandoned project, um, and then we release it 3 months maximum. Uh, the game became what comes after because it has the same engine, it has the same gameplay, everything, but it's just like the dumbed down version of our ideal game that nobody wants. And during the development of what comes after, somebody finally replied and was interested in my prototype that I sent out 5 months earlier. So in the end, the way we validated the game was somebody want to spend money to make this game real. It's not the it's not the best way to do it, but it works.
Right. So I like that you mentioned that it's not about the first prototype, right? It
Yeah,
it will take you several prototypes before are able to figure out what's
yeah.
really
Even
the right one.
if it's one prototype, it might take you like months and months until somebody notice it. Yeah.
Right. That's cool. That's cool. And I like that you mentioned that, yeah, I mean, even some prototypes can be a derivative of other prototypes. So it's good that if you have a prototype there for developers, you should keep it maybe for future references or something like that. That will
I
be
think
still helpful for you.
if I'm not mistaken, this is how Kid Fox games work. So basically, in every game they make sure that they can use they can reuse something for their next game. So you don't need to rework everything from the ground up. And that's how we do it with the prototype. Yeah.
Right. Awesome. All right. Next, let's go to Javi or Javi. Let's go to Javi. How do you define if the prototype is fun?
Um, I wouldn't use the word fun because like I think the past two or three games that I made were not in the strictest sense fun. One was really depressing. So I think to know if your game actually is quote unquote good, it has to be able to communicate what your goals are, and you only find that out by letting people try it out. So, for example, my depressing game, did it make you depressed? Did it make you think? So you have to think about those questions that your game. You have to think about those questions that your game will supposedly answer, and you have to communicate with the people testing your game to see if it worked for them. Like, for example, in a game where you have no choice and you supposedly get killed by someone over and over, um, the goal of the game was for me to say, "Oh, killing is bad," but then you could completely like you could someone that plays your game might completely miss the point and think, "Oh, killing is good." So with that, it's not about fun or not. It's more like your game was not communicated well enough. And if your game fails at communicating, then it's not doing a good job. Just to add to that, to know if your game is good, you shouldn't just think about is it good in the moment. Like, am I having fun with it now? Especially for those long-term games, like, um, will I have fun with it 2 weeks down the line? Will I want to learn more about the game? Will I play it again? Those are those little goals that you really have to think about, and you have to know when you have people playtest. So you can't just have them playtest and say, "Oh, is this fun?" You have to let people playtest and make you want and make you and you have to be asking, "Is this meeting my goals for my game?" Yeah.
Right. I like that you mentioned about the emotions because, yes, some games or most games are sort of like emotional engineering. It's like an emotional medium to make you feel something, and that's cool that you're kind of focusing on that and the emotions of the what you feel from the game. And last would be Roan. What are the signs to look for? Prototype is good.
Well, if I'll be looking for the signs, I think it's not on my end. That's because I always create the game single-handedly. Then if I'll be uploading them, then the best sign that I would base on if it's good for production are them. Well, mostly it's the people that are playing the game. That's because if you're going to ask me if it's good, then I would already tell it's good. If I say it's bad, then I know it's already bad. But then the best judge would be the people who are playing that. That's actually because I upload games on Newgrounds. I'm sure some of you know that I make games on Newgrounds, and mostly it's the Newgrounds that they front page games, the people that are trying to play your game, even if you feel you're left out, but you're still getting noticed. And also even people outside Newgrounds, I don't know where they're coming from. I just received some emails that some of them would like to buy a license. I don't even know that I even make licenses. But anyway, some people want to buy a source file. That's because of their events. Well, recently I got that. But then anyway, mostly if I would directly answer the question, if it's the people that they like, they rate it more than 4. If it's even if it's trolling, but then if it trolls, then they still want it. They still dedicate the rating system in order to put you on the top. That's because, well, that's what they want, or that's what the um, that's probably the market at the moment. But yeah, I'm not going to go contrast to the NFT because NFT is really the trend at the moment. Anyway, mostly it's the people that gives me the signs if it's good for production. That's because, to be honest, mostly I upload games in Newgrounds as prototypes. They're not really at their full potential. But then if it's a potential for a production, that's because it gave them a emotion to put it to a couple of websites, especially on Twitter. Recently, I also got a game from Newgrounds because they retweeted it for some reason, and I think, yeah, I just repeating the same thing over and over. But then, yeah, it's mostly the people that gives you sign. Uh, if it tells you to keep on going, you have to make it more than that, and then you're going to, well, it's mostly on my end if it's going to be worth the time on uh, leveling up more than a prototype. So there, yeah.
Right. I like that you
Uh,
mentioned that. Yeah.
a little bit. Embraceitch.io is the best website to do this.
Right. Right. So yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I'm gonna follow from Fami that it's cool that Rowan mentioned that he has the HIO to be sort of a prototyping like platform for him. So because yeah, sometimes we get like pressured in releasing maybe mobile games or maybe other platforms. But if you have maybe an indie platform, like for example Newgrounds, you can just put everything there and just test the market from there. HIO, yeah, it's a really good way to get feedback from your players, and maybe if a game works from there, you can maybe make it full production game. So yeah, that's really cool.
Can I add
Yeah,
a little bit? I might sound like a very pessimistic person here, but in case none of your prototype works, if you upload it publicly, if you show it to the people, it's your portfolio and you will need it to find jobs. So upload your prototype, show it to the world, ask people how they feel about the game. Even if they don't work, it's your portfolio.
right. And yeah, I think creatives as well should be able to get something even from negative feedbacks. Don't be afraid of negative feedbacks because there's something there for you to learn. Before we proceed to the last question, actually, let's try to go for crowd questions first. Yeah, anybody in the panel can answer. Just maybe raise your hand if you want. So first is let's go to Project Flaming Leo. What do publishers usually look for in a prototype?
Maybe I can get this one, Derek.
Sure.
Since I guess we're a bit of a publisher as well at OP Game, but it really depends. Like it depends on what market you are in. For example, in hyper casual games, if you've been in that market, it's very interesting. Like before you actually do the prototype, they make a video of the prototype. So and then they share that to the ad networks, and then they look at the click through rates. And if enough people are clicking the ad, then that's when they're gonna continue production of the prototype. So that's one thing. And then it depends. For example, if you go to an artsy publisher like Annapurna, they're the ones who are making these very artsy games. Um, I don't know what their process is, right? But it's probably it has to be something that's very different. It's not the same games that you see. It has to be these emotional games, like Happy mentioned, emotional games like Journey or these other games that you don't usually see, not the mass market games. In our case, I guess as a publisher, also on our end, what we're really looking for is we're hoping that game developers explore Web3, like use this new technology. We want them to open source their work, really try to figure out this Web3 space with us. So it really depends. Sometimes it's about the money. Sometimes it's about the ads. Sometimes it's about whether the publisher has a certain specific set of criteria that they're looking for. But yeah, but I think a good prototype really go a long way in you convincing these publishers.
Awesome, awesome. Let's go to the next question from. Oh, does anybody want to add to that?
A little bit. So I'm a scout myself for a publisher, indie publisher, and we usually try to look for a hook in the game. Like your game can be anything; it can be any genre, and any genre requires different. They have different quality. Like emotional games, you don't expect them to have like a fun 100 hours gameplay on it, but it has to have hooks, good premise, and if you can if you can convince people that the hook will work, is the first step towards a good prototype, I guess.
Awesome, awesome. Anybody wants to add to that? Maybe one last. Okay, let's proceed to the next question. Now from Althea Ong. Does a prototype have to be what the full game would look like? Or is it just like major parts of the game? So maybe
Hello,
on the scale of the prototype.
hello. Can I take this?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, well, as I mentioned, a prototype is a snapshot of your intended game. So it's not a full game. It's never intended to be a full game, but it's more of it's your core game mechanic. So of course, games have this core game mechanic that the entire thing revolves around. Every feature that you add must feed into that loop to make it better. So for us, when we make prototypes, we just have to make sure that this core game loop is enjoyable. I don't want to use the word fun because Javi is right that not every game is fun. But is it enjoyable? Is it engaging? Does it meet its purpose? Is this core game loop sustainable? Is this core game loop scalable? And then you add features to that core game loop. So to me, a prototype could be as anything as boxes and circles. In fact, we do prototypes with boxes and circles, but we have to ensure, well, we make sure that the core game loop is there, and then that's what we fiddle around with.
All right, core game loop. That's awesome.
I would also like to answer this question. So if it's the major part that the one who or asked the question, the major part should be the core mechanic, like what Sir Robert said. So the core mechanic is really important. That's because if you're going to show a prototype and you're just flexing a great graphic, or rather some parts of the game that doesn't contribute the main point of the game, uh, it should be necessary to throw away the core mechanic. That's because if you're going to create a prototype, then it should follow the core mechanic. Just like you can just stick to shapes, you can grab graphics that would make sense, but it still makes sense to the prototype. So it's not necessary to create great graphics, also to make a high level audio. Uh, the point here is to create something playable. So it's just a playable game that would level up in the future, or rather would level up in the full game. So just make a playable game from a good flow. So what will happen if you get to the first frame, second frame, third frame, and then what would be the um, how would I say this? The tip of the core mechanic. That's it.
Right.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Go
So
happy.
the question is, does a prototype have to be what the full game will look like?
Right.
Um, I think by the end of it, it won't. Like your game will never necessarily look exactly like your prototype, and it might not even feel the same way. But that's the point of making a prototype. You're supposed to find out what works and what doesn't work. So by making this prototype, you might also surprise yourself with, oh, this thing that I totally did not expect to be a mechanic is super fun. It was a bug, but what if we turn that into the whole game? So let your own project surprise you and just see where it goes from there. If it's fun, if it's fun. If it's not fun, eh, yeah.
Right. I like that you mentioned that your project should surprise you because yeah, that's true. I mean, you should not let your project limit you in a way. You're prototyping, just have fun with it and explore ideas. Let's take a question from Johanna. Yeah,
Can I add
sure,
something?
sure.
So the game that depends on what game you're working on, because if you see the indie games, the movie documentary, you can see that Braid looks basically they use like Mario asset like for the most of the development, and they made the proper asset like later on, and because the game focus on the gameplay, while games like Coffee Talk, if you saw our prototype, our first prototype doesn't look like the game, but the art looks very polished for a prototype. And then the second demo we have, it doesn't have everything in the game yet. It doesn't even have the latte art system, but the art looks closer to the final release because Coffee Talk is not about gameplay. Coffee Talk is about we want to make the players feel the vibe of coffee shop. So that's the core mechanic is not a mechanic for the game. So focus on what you want to sell the most in the game. That's the core point of your prototype, I guess.
Awesome, awesome. Next would be from Johanna AQ. How do you know if people will like your game based on your prototype? I think this is a really interesting question because sometimes it can be subjective, like what's like, what this doesn't like. So, anybody wants to answer?
Me, quick answer. You will know if people will like your game based on your prototype if you let them play it and they like it. If they don't like it, they don't like it.
All right. So, yeah, there needs to be a player. But I think that the question is more of like, how do you know if people Yeah, yeah. Okay, sure.
Hello. Yes,
Anybody
I would
wants to
like to
answer
take
next?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, to add on to that, yes, that's exactly what the prototype is. You have to let the target market play the game, and there's really no way to know if they will like it or not until you get it into their hands. For example, like I've been saying, some things sound better in your head, and then in practice it doesn't. So a lot of times we think that the game is fun. We as devs have fun with it, but that's because we're devs. We know how the game works. Once we get it to the target audience, even at the prototype stage, they just say, what's this? This is not, and then just we just do it all over again. So the best metric to find out if your game is fun is you can't say it's like what they say about viral videos. There's no recipe for success. There's no recipe for being viral. You just have to put it out there and do it often, and then it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. If it sticks, it sticks. Most of it will fall down.
And a little more thing, as we all know, the internet cannot shut up at all. So if they don't like your game, they will tell it to you like they won't hold back telling how much they hate your game. So just let it go to the public and brace yourself.
Brace yourself. I like that.
Uh, the only thing I would have to tell about it is just if the internet likes your game, because the internet is the best place to know whether. Well, that's the same answer that I tell about the sign. So it's just the world. If the world is willing to do something, well, even if it's good or bad, if they will do something to your game, they like it. So there.
Right. Cool. So like almost all the answers are, get your game out and get some feedback. It's important to not have your game in your locker. Next question, maybe last question before we proceed to another panel question is, in your experience from Project Flaming Leo again, in your experience, what are your biggest setbacks when prototyping a game, and what advice you could share so that aspiring developers could avoid them?
Hello, hello.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess my answer for this is again similar to what we've been saying about prototypes. It's better to fail fast and fail often. So when it comes to making your prototype, don't be afraid of churning it out and just letting it fail. So I guess one of the biggest pitfalls that you will encounter in making your prototype is being too attached to your ideas. I always say this to the development team: learn how to kill your darlings. It's saying in written in books and media. Learn how to kill your darlings. Don't get attached to your ideas, because a lot of times, especially for us designers, we get really, really attached to an idea, especially if we've been working on it for a long time. It's been brewing in our heads since forever, or sometimes programmers who have been making this prototype 3 weeks in straight, they just don't know how to let go. And that's bad. So, one of the best things that I can suggest for you in making a prototype is just learn how to let go. If it's not good, then stop. Don't learn how to kill your darlings, and then just move on. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Learn how to kill your darlings. Good luck, guys, for the developers out there. Anybody would
Mm,
like to add?
Javier.
Um,
Okay, you
I
go
can
first,
go
Javi.
first. Then okay. Okay. So one of the biggest, one of the no, one of the more memorable setbacks I've had while working on prototypes is after a while you just okay, I have something that works. I've played it enough, and then you just hit this wall. There's this big wall that says, now what? What do I do with this? So I think if you're feeling that at that point and there's a hesitation that says maybe people won't like it, that's the point where you have to let people try it. You have to brace yourself, like Fami said, find out what they think, gather as much as you can, maybe cry a little when you read it, and then adjust. And then you hit another roadblock, you do that same thing over and over again. Otherwise, you're just going to be stuck in your very isolating feedback loop of I'm just with my by myself with my own game. What do I do next? How do I make this fun? And the only answer I can give you to answer that, how do I make that fun, is to just let other people tell you how it should be fun. You don't listen to the words exactly they say, but you try to detect, oh, they didn't enjoy it because blank. You try to parse what they're feeling, and then you make the necessary adjustments to your game to sway it towards, more being more fun. Yeah.
Right.
My turn. Right. I would have to be honest here as well. That's because I'm also a lazy person. I'm a lazy person. That's because well, if I create a prototype, I've been doing this a more than a decade. So I tend to be lazier than ever. But then, if you don't fight your laziness, then it's going to be a nightmare if you don't fight for your laziness. So probably if I be fighting myself in order to get to prototyping, then I would avoid having a setback to prototyping games. And also, I have to prepare the inevitable. So, inevitable, it means that if you can get stuck to a feature that you're working on, probably an hour, even if it's just a simple walking animation and you get stuck on a wall, that also helps you get to the prototype. So, it's mostly preparing for the inevitable. If you don't prepare for the inevitable, then it'll give you a bad day in creating a prototype. So yeah, always prepare for the inevitable. Just get on with it and just do it. Like probably just do it because that's what we always see in the internet. Just do it.
I just want to add
Yeah.
one thing also, because I remembered something when Javi said about hitting a wall. That happens to me a lot of the times also when you're like trying to do something right and you're just you just don't know how to fix it. For example, you just don't know what the next step is. So one thing to do there, I guess, is to just step back, just take a walk outside. I know it's hard to do that right now, but just step back from what you're doing. Just take a broader view of things because sometimes even if you're looking at the core mechanic and it's not really working out, you just really have to uh, just to take a look at it from a different view, look at it in a different lens, and maybe you'll find out what the next step is.
Right. Explore the
Yeah.
world. Yeah,
Yep.
Sammy.
So two things. One, biggest setback is always money. Yeah, take a drink. I said money again. Second, it's kind of opposite of what Robert said, but you have to balance it because you need to be able to kill your darling, right? But sometimes we have too many ideas. We cannot stay in one idea until it's done. Like even prototype that only take 1 month. Sometimes in the middle of the prototyping, you say, "Well, what if I make something else instead?" And you ended up never finishing any prototypes at all because the ideas keep coming. You need to balance between finishing something and not get too attached with it because make sure you finish it. It's super hard. Even as just a prototype, finishing something is super hard. Yeah. Don't get distracted. Yeah, that's the word.
Right. I'm guilty of that, Fami. So that hit me in the heart. Finish your prototypes. I like that advice. Yeah, I think everybody answered. So we're actually gonna go to our last question. Um, what are your tips for fast and efficient prototyping? I think we can start out with maybe Robert first.
Okay, so what we do in the studio is we treat prototyping as part of the development process. I mean, I mentioned before that it's called pre-prod just because it's done pre-production, but that doesn't mean it's not. You have to pay for manpower. So it's part of the development process. So just like any development part of the pipeline, you have to ensure that it's efficient. So you have to set deadlines, plot out tasks. It's fun to just do things on the fly, but that's not sustainable. So even in the prototyping phase, we do a sort of task list or a goal. We do this by this time, we do this by this time, and then we review. So we have a sort of a plan to. We still have a plan that we follow, our schedule. Sorry, we still have a schedule that we follow when it comes to prototyping to ensure that we are making it as efficient as possible. And then another tip that I can tell is we kind of figured it out late but it would really help if your prototype has a reset button. I know it sounds a bit obvious, but it gets tedious at times if you make a build and then you ship it out to everyone, and then they have to force close the app, open it again, run through the entire loading process just to play the game again. So if you have a dedicated reset button that will clear everything from scratch, you start again at the beginning, or you start again at certain points, checkpoints, so you can review those parts. That would be the best. But if it will take a lot of time to do that, then don't, because do it fast, do it quick, ugly, and dirty.
Awesome, awesome. How about Fami?
Tips for fast and efficient prototyping. Damn, that's hard. I guess plan ahead. That's good. Know what you want to make, because uh, limit yourself on. You need to know what you want to make, what you want to present at one point that the prototype is done. Uh, don't let it don't bloat the prototype until it feels like a full game. Just make sure it's in the scope of prototype. And the most practical thing is, based on experience, you will finish your prototype once you run out of money again. It will happen naturally.
All right. Yeah, the production side of things is really important for prototyping as well. So, how about maybe Paul? Do you have something to
Yeah, sure. No,
share?
I guess we talked a lot about what to do now over the session. But one thing I could add is maybe use the tools that you're comfortable with. For example, sometimes we try and prototype, and then we're like, oh, maybe I can use this time to study phaser, and then you spend most of the time fighting the tool. So if you want to find the fun quickly, use something that you're comfortable with. Use Unity, use whatever, even if JavaScript. I use JavaScript a lot, so it's not for games, but if it allows you to really create something that's playable, then that works. So yeah, use the tools that you're comfortable with just for the prototype.
Right. And it will help you focus more on finding the core of your
Yeah,
game if you're
definitely.
comfortable with the tool. Next would be Ron.
Hello. For me, I have to go to game jams often, probably every month. But then don't ask me when I just entered the last game jam. But then game jams are really important to me. That's because if I don't join game jams, then I'm not making games. And I actually listed a bunch of bullets here, so I'm not supposed to be expecting if this prototype will work. That's because if I end up expecting, then you will end up with a lot of boundaries. That's because your expectations aren't met. You have to accept the failure. That's because if you don't accept failures, just like what I said earlier, if you're not prepared for the inevitable, then it's not going to be good enough. If some of you guys are, well, the people who are already watching this, if you're working in a game development industry, just keep on doing what you're doing in the game dev industry. That's because we're adaptive. Adaptive in terms of we can also do this outside the work. So you can also improve yourselves in your industry. Well, unless if you sleep often, but then don't sleep. Well, I can advise sleep because sleep is also important. My brain works better if I have good hours of sleep. Aside from work, accepting failures, you also have to create personal games. That's because if you have personal games, just like in game jams, then you'll also end up with more games that you can take a look, just in case you want to evaluate yourself. Well, also evaluate yourself. Then, if you have personal games, don't throw them away, even if it's the crappiest game that you've made in your life. That's because if you throw your past creations, then there is nothing to return. Just in case you want to look back, what have you done from the first part of your prototyping phases or other games that you create? Uh, Starting from the top, like game jams and everything, everything that I said matters. So what you said or what you done from square one, let's say from the opening of an application, writing something, it's for the game. Actually, everything matters. So if this doesn't matter, then we cannot be able to be fast, efficient, and we wouldn't have a prototype. So yeah, overall, so if you do all of these steps like what I'm doing, but then I don't advise to be like me. But then uh, if you do this all over and over and over and over again, then you can be fast and efficient in terms of transferring from one game to another because you've done this from the last game. Then if you encountered this kind of process to another game, then you already know what to do. Yeah, you're fast and efficient. In short,
Awesome. I like that you mentioned that you should have an idea pool of previous games. It will help you a
yeah.
lot. And sleep. I also need that. So good reminder.
We
How about Javi for our last
Okay.
answer?
So different people have different ways of becoming fast and efficient. So I think the only way you're gonna find out what will make you fast and efficient is if you do it yourself. The more prototypes you make, the more you'll find out what's your workflow, how you think. Then listen to how you work, and then if you work that way, if you're excited about your work, then I think in general you're just gonna be faster at it.
Awesome. Awesome. So yeah, I guess that's it for our panel questions and our discussion for today. I did like that we have different types of designers and developers here. They offer a different like type of prototyping depending on the studio, and I think that's an important takeaway for us that each of us, each developer has maybe our own variation of how we do approach our prototypes. But yeah, I think for developers out there, hopefully you have learned a thing or two from our panel and maybe piece together something that will work for you, that will help you out in your prototyping process. But Paul, Fami, Rohan, Javi, and Robert, they offered really insightful, things about how they do their prototyping process, and I thank them a lot for this talk. So now we're going to go to Marika to close our Piggy talk for today.
All right. So thank you, Derek. Actually, from the entire Philippine Indie Games Initiative organizers, Ryan, Danny, John, and Walter, and me as well. So we would like to thank our moderator, Derek Mapago, speakers, Paul, Roan, Javi, Robert, and Fami, and of course our production volunteer, Lems Marinas, for making this session happen. So thank you for actually for our speakers and of course our moderator. Thank you for the amazing inputs tonight. Hopefully our audience are able to pick up some tips and hacks to start their game dev journey.